Welcome. I have had the pleasure of speaking to these individuals for the past hour in the green room. I can tell you this is going to be a rowdy discussion based on our conversations that we were having backstage. At the very least, it's going to be the best dressed panel of the day, I believe. So the topic of this is a new era. And we're going to be talking about this new era post Section 377. This is my cue to tell you that there's a poll coming up, so I would get your phones ready. Because as we have this conversation, I want to understand, when we talk about LGBTQ initiatives, what are we really fighting for? So if we can pull up the first poll. The question is, which LGBTQ initiatives means the most to the community? And I would like to get an idea of, especially within this audience, what you think is meaningful to the community as we start this conversation. Interesting. I would not have picked right to legally wed. You're laughing, Parmesh. What do you got?
Well, I think we're in India, right? And marriage is such a big thing for us.
Yeah.
I say this everywhere I go. I mean, if you legalize LGBTQ marriage in this country, we will bump up our GDP by a couple of percentage at least. Because straight marriage is such a big industry, and straight people are sweet, but kind of boring. So imagine if you start empowering queer marriage. Think of how much bigger, how much grander, how many more billions of dollars Sabyasachi will make despite his problematic Instagram posts. So I can understand, why marriage is deeply emotional, right? Also, a lot of queer people in this country, we are hounded by our straight parents and families to get into, straight marriage. And so we have to spend a lot of our time trying to work around that. So imagine if you empower LGBTQ marriage, you'll say, we're getting married, it's going to be big, it's going to be fabulous, you're invited. But I personally I don't agree in terms of importance. I really think option number 3, which was transgender. Is really, really vital and important in this country. We have had a very progressive transgender, a Supreme Court judgment called the Nalsa judgment, which then translated over the years into a problematic, but we now have a transgender bill. So I think keeping in the spirit of the judgment, the bill, and the recent Section 377 going away, I think in terms of just basic rights, I think transgender and then surgery rights would be the most important, at least in my perspective.
What about you, Sandra? Out of those questions there, which one would you have picked if you were voting?
Insurance for transgender surgery, because most of the transgender, they cannot afford to do sex reassignment surgery, and we want to get done with the surgery to become a full-fledged woman. Yeah.
Daniel?
I would have chosen something that's not on there.
Okay,
Maybe it's
great.
not fair.
Yeah.
It would be anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah.
And I think the Section 377 ruling, congratulations, India. It's so incredible to be here with that ruling because it took 24 years at least. And that court ruling was so beautifully written. It included an apology to the community, and it wasn't just a ruling that said, do what you want in your bedrooms, but it was rooted in equality, morality, choice, and even the nature of love. And it really paves the way to enshrine all LGBT people into the constitutional protections of India, and even said that government has a role to address stigma against the community. So anti-discrimination, I believe, is critical. There's only 10 countries in the world that have anti-discrimination protections. Yeah.
Interesting. Parmesh, I'd like to swing it back over to you, because I know you're going to have an opinion on this one. You co-authored a manifesto for trans inclusion in India. And in one of your quotes, the many quotes that I was highlighting when I read it, you said, quote, "While the law now supports the community, there's a world of difference between decriminalization and true equality. And we firmly believe that corporates have a role to play in bridging this gap." Do you feel like corporates are doing enough to bridge this gap?
Oh, well, I think a lot of corporates were doing a lot even before the 2018 377 judgment. So I, just hats off to all the companies that have been doing this for so many years, whether it's my own Godrej, There have been so many other progressive companies, whether it's Tata, Tata Steel in particular, whether it's the Lalit Group of Hotels, which as of now has 66 LGBTQ people, including I think 35 trans people on their rolls. So there have been so many companies that have been doing a lot. I think the presence of 377 was this fig leaf that a lot of homophobic Indian companies could hide behind, and the legal department. So a lot of the times people would say, we're not homophobic, but this law exists, although the law in no way, would never punish a company for being, inclusive. The law was something that was about people doing private acts in their bedroom, and it criminalized consensual sex. The law was had nothing to do with equality, but still, I think now that the law is gone, this fig leaf is removed. So companies can't hide, and also companies that want to be inclusive can be inclusive. So what we are seeing is a lot of interest. There's a bunch of great efforts, whether it's LGBTQ job fairs. There have been 2 that have already happened in the past year. There are so many more planned. Whether it's consulting companies like Periphery, which work on, just hiring trans people, based on a consulting model. And there have been so many great efforts that have been happening. But I don't think they're enough because as we saw in the slides before as well, right? The challenges that we face in India are so vast. LGBTQ people, from those mingle statistics itself, right? About 2/3 of people who are working in companies report hearing homophobic remarks. Most people are not out. Living conditions are very, very difficult, including if you're trans, it's much, much, much worse. So there's so much more that companies can do. And I think Indian companies are excited, are interested, but a lot of the interest is in superficial things like putting rainbow filters on Instagram around the time of June, which is Pride Month in the US, not even in India. We have our own Pride Months, which differs from city to city. So in Mumbai, it's January, for example. So I think a lot of companies feel happy and excited because they think suddenly this is a cool thing to do. So it's very easy to put a rainbow filter on Instagram. It's very easy to call people like me to give a talk once a year on your company campus and then be homophobic the rest of the time. I think there's so much more work to be done, and I wish that companies understand this, because whichever way you look at it, being inclusive makes sense for the companies. If you're being inclusive, you're not doing us a favor. You're doing yourself a favor, whether it's in making more money. There was a survey that came out some years ago saying that LGBTQ people in India itself, assuming that 6% of India is LGBTQ, it's a $200 billion market, right? Who wants a piece of $200 billion? No one else does? Wow. I'll take it all. We'll take it all, right? The World Bank did a survey in 2016 where they measured the reverse. They measured the cost of homophobia. And that came up to $32 billion, right? So there's so much money to be made. There's study after study that shows that LGBTQ being inclusive is good from an innovation perspective, from a millennial hiring perspective, from everything. So I wish that Indian companies understood that being inclusive is really good. It's going to make them a lot of money and make them more competitive. So instead of being silly and trendy and doing easy stuff like putting rainbow stickers and filters, I wish they did the hard work of giving us jobs and actually, walking the talk.
And we're going to get into that walking the talk. I'm just going to ask you to be a little bit clearer on your perspectives on things, and because it's really tough to figure out where you stand on these things. You're very reserved and hidden on your point of view.
I'm a slippery slope.
Daniel, I want to turn the conversation to you because, as Parmesh was just explaining, corporates need to do more than just hashtag this, hashtag that, rainbow flag here, rainbow flag there.
You mean something like this?
Yeah. So, but
or something
Levi's,
like this.
But Levi Strauss has really, when you talk about walking the walk, Levi's has been doing this, and not recently, not when it's become trendy. They've been doing it for decades, and covering decades where it was really, really difficult, and where they got a lot of pushback.
Sure.
And more specifically, I know you and I had a conversation about, there were some very threatening correspondence to executives within your company, threatening letters. There was security that had to come. Why why were they so diligent? Why does Levi's continue to be so diligent about equality?
I'm really glad that Parmesh raised this point, because there's been a lot of conversations about, can any brand at Pride season just slap a rainbow on and say that they're inclusive to the community? I'm part of a company that's 167 years old. I've been part of the company for about 10% of that time. And throughout the history, we've not shied away from using our voice, our influence, our products to weigh in on what we care about. And maybe it's true to our brand because it's about authentic self-expression. Let me illustrate. In 1992, Levi Strauss & Company became the first to provide domestic partner benefits for same-sex couples. And that same year, this was in corporate America, anti-discrimination laws were just coming into being. And I'm part of the foundation, and we really looked at that very carefully. I wasn't part of it, actually, a colleague at that point. And they realized that if we matched employee gifts to the Boy Scouts of America, it would be a violation of our policy on behalf, because they do not allow LGBT to become Scoutmasters. So we made the decision to stop matching gifts to the Boy Scouts of America. And that triggered a consumer boycott. And there was a sort of a religious right organization that sent over 130,000 letters.
And to be clear, it was a Methodist minister from Tupelo, Mississippi.
Yes.
Who was at the time was the head of the American Family Association.
And we needed to set aside a separate room for those letters. But we wanted to stand by our values. This was the right thing to do. And our CEO also said, look at the zip codes. Are these folks who would buy our products, or would they shop somewhere like Walmart? And the analysis from Marketplace Insights was the latter. And we stood the ground. And it was there's a New York Times story written about this, and it says that Levi's is taking a hard line on the new diversity of society. And it's really, to me, the question around Pride is, are you willing to stand in the face of tension with the community? And we were in 2007, marriage equality in the U.S. seems like a distant sort of history, but marriage equality was up for consideration by the California Supreme Court. Guess how many companies signed a note to the Supreme Court in support? There was actually only one, and that was Levi Strauss & Company. But if you go 8 years later, when marriage equality was being considered by the U.S. Supreme Court, we were really happy to be joined by 378 other companies. So, as an American icon, Levi Strauss & Company, we believe that what we say about America matters. And when we as a big brand use our voice, we hopefully hope it will give others permission to be more than what they stand for and stand for more.
So I read that New York Times article about the boycott. And there was an interesting paragraph in there that I want to read, because it's a real strong example of knowing your customer. And this was in reaction to the American Family Association calling for the boycott of Levi products. And it says, in the past, such declarations have sent chills through corporate America. While millions of Americans are too lazy or too apathetic to vote, they vote every day by what they buy and don't buy. But reverse arithmetic might apply here. According to a recent survey at Overlooked Opinions, a market research company in Chicago, 3 out of 4 gay men prefer Levi's jeans, especially the 501 button front style, over other brands. So good luck with that boycott. Because you were speaking to your customer, you were standing up for what they believed in. Sandra, I would like to bring you in because Parmesh and Daniel are very much engaged in the corporate side. You are an individual who is having to, especially as a trans model, that is having to get, that is very much personally involved in trying to get, to get work. Everything that they're talking about, and having brands and having corporations engage with members of the LGBT community. This is something that you deal with every day. So your experiences working as a professional transgender model, where do you see inclusion within the fashion industry specifically? I mean, do you see it happening?
Well, I think the most accepting has been the makeup, hair, and designing, but not so much on the mainstream runways. So it's very difficult to push transgender model into the industry because of our patriarchal, homophobic, conservative views or mindsets of the people. So recently there are some changes in the fashion industry, like the painting, then Levi's, Calvin Klein, they embrace transgender model in their campaigns and all. Yeah, but I think it's getting more accepting.
So do you see companies like you said it was Calvin?
Sorry?
What was it? Was Calvin Klein one of the companies?
Yeah.
So companies, when you have big names like Calvin Klein, does that then translate into more work for you?
Good for her? Yeah, it is.
Are you getting more work as a result of this? Or not so much?
Not much.
Yeah. Do you feel like that fashion brands fully recognize the spending power of the LGBT community?
Like the brands and all, they should endorse transgender models, not only transgender, but like the models from LGBT community, that this will motivate them, like motivate and encourage LGBT consumers from the LGBT spectrum to celebrate their true selves through fashion and responsible lifestyle choice.
One thing that you are passionately involved in is you organize beauty pageants exclusively for transgender women. Why beauty pageants?
Because it's a means. It's one of means for trans activism. Like beauty pageant plays an important role in transgender because most of the transgender are victim of social and political discrimination. So beauty pageant gives a platform for transgender women to show their hidden talents and beauty in a very LGBT-friendly environment.
Do you think you would be able to do this if you did not have the support of private organizations?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah. Parmesh, I want to go back to one of the things that you were talking about earlier, and you were talking about embracing this younger generation, specifically the millennial generation. Because in 2020, millennials and Gen Y will be 50% of the workforce, and by 2025, they will represent 25% of by 2025, they will represent 75% of the workforce. You and I have had conversations that companies need to do more from a PR perspective to engage this millennial Gen Y audience, because they are not going to just sit passively on the sidelines and say this continues to be okay. From where you sit and what you deal with every day, what are some of the basic steps that corporates can do, and specifically in India, to start engaging this current and next generation?
I think companies have to really understand, I think just to start with, companies need to look at who's leading them. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are led by older men who seem to be very disconnected with the audience out there, which, surprise, surprise, is 50% women, perhaps, 6 to 10% LGBTQ, and diverse in so many different ways. And I think the first thing that people who run companies can do would be to open their eyes and look out there. And not be so caught into their own bubble of what they imagine the world is like. If they do that, they will realize that there is so much more to be gained by being inclusive than by not. Just to give you a sense, right? Godrej is 125 years old, slightly younger than Levi's maybe, and we recruit on college campuses across the country. I often go on these recruitment journeys, and at every college campus we go to, it's just so amazing to hear from these young people. Like at every talk I give, there are literally sometimes 100 young people surrounding me telling me how happy they are that Godrej, this old traditional Indian company, stands up for LGBTQ rights, right? It matters to them. Any survey you look at, they will tell you that young people really care about their companies, their brands, being authentic, caring about things. It's not just LGBTQ rights, it's climate change, it's the values. So companies today really have to stand for something because we live in a world where products and services are pretty much ubiquitous. So what you stand for really matters. So we've benefited so much at Godrej by just putting it out there that we are inclusive and we care about this. I'll give you just one number. The week of the Section 377 verdict in 2018, I personally happened to go on a couple of TV shows and write a couple of opinion pieces. Our PR team monetized that, and it was 12 crores of PR for like 4 or 5 days of just being out there. That's just 1 week of goodwill. Now, I've been doing this for 9 years.
Yeah.
You can imagine the hundreds of crores that we've generated for Godrej just from a PR perspective, right?
Yeah.
Forget the innovation benefits, forget the money that like so many queer people have bought more, Godrej products and all, right? So I think progressive companies like Levi's, like us, like so many others are understanding that the audience has completely changed. So, and this is what I say all the time, even if you're like an old man and probably running a company, which is most of you, even if you happen to be homophobic or ignorant, even if you don't believe in this as a basic, intrinsic, decent thing to do, which is what you should, do it because your audience demands it. Do it because there's money to be made. Do it because there's innovation to be made, right? And I think while doing all of this, you will maybe come to your senses and understand that being inclusive is really, really good for you as well. So. And if you want more, there's a lot of stuff online. There's a report that we've written. Just Google all of this stuff and it's out there, right? So.
And Daniel, you and I were talking backstage before we came out here. Levi's does a lot of research and pays very close attention to this audience and this generation, what they care about. They're more than just consumers. They are only going to purchase brands that they feel like are aligned with the same things that they're passionate about.
Some of the latest research shows that among millennials and Gen Z, that around 75% want to work for an employer that not only shares their values, but stands up for the causes they believe in. I think among millennials, you find that it's not only what you stand for, but what you stand up for companies. And we're also in the most disruptive political environment that many of us have faced in our lifetimes. And when there's disruption, you see folks who are already vulnerable in society preyed on even more. So I think also with gridlock and inaction by government in so many different places, I'll tell you in the US, it's been a time for companies to step in and take the charge on many unaddressed issues. And these have been gun safety, looking at immigration with the Muslim ban and the Dreamers. Trans rights has been really big. And Levi Strauss and company has actually taken stands, used our voice, funded organizations at the front lines of this. And we actually look at who our core consumer is. They're ahead of the game. And for us, it's standing up for our values. I think that millennials are standing for the right side of history. And we hope these positions will stand.
So I want to close with a poll. We started with a poll. I want to close with a poll. So the second poll question is, how many people do you know who are out to their colleagues? So is it more than 10, around 5, less than 5, or none? I'm curious to see what we get back. Less than 5. And look how high it is for none. 27, 20, yeah. It's fluctuating around there. So we're out of time. The four of us, we have been talking about this for easily an hour before we even came out here. We'll probably continue to talk about this for another hour. So in closing remarks, I would just like to say, as an advocate in training, as I view myself, the biggest takeaway that I have learned from the discussions we've had on stage and off stage, that it's not just individuals that are transitioning. It is an entire generation. And if corporates do not wake up and transition with this generation, they're going to find themselves out of business. So, thank you.